Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Kelly Caudle, and I'm one of the stage captains here today at First Baptist. I'm just going to give you a few brief announcements before our program begins. I believe our guests here will be signing books afterward. I want to go ahead and say that, so we'll if you buy one. So we'll have them exit out to the side door here, and they'll be available afterward. If we've got time, there may be a Q&A at the conclusion of this presentation. And in that case, there's a microphone in the center of the room right here. As you listen to the presentation, should we have a Q&A, please think of one concise question you would like to ask. Please avoid making any long introductory remarks, and please give other people a chance to have their turn to ask a question. Okay, as you know, books are available for purchase, and Eagle Eye is our bookseller for this venue, and they're straight out front. And I want to remind you that every purchase made by any of the independent booksellers at the festival today, a portion of your purchase goes to support the Decatur Book Festival. So you're helping them, you're helping the festival, it's a win-win. I'll also let you know that Decatur Book Festival is a nonprofit. It depends on sponsors and donations to bring great authors to Decatur each year. So please consider a tax-deductible donation to support the festival by going to the festival website, www.decaturbookfestival.com. Okay, and lastly, would you please make sure that anything that rings or makes noises, buzzes, those things are turned off. And I will now introduce our guest on stage with me. Hi. So our moderator is Kim Carter Fuller. Kim Carter Fuller grew up and still lives in Plains, Georgia. In her former life, she taught high school for 31 years. She is now the executive director of the Friends of Jimmy Carter National Historical Park. The Friends help the park fund various projects needed to adapt President and Mrs. Carter's story for a public audience. I think that means she's a communicator, a good communicator, storyteller. And Andrew Greer is here with his new book, and he's an author, musician, and filmmaker. He's published 2 books, and he has released multiple chart-topping recordings. He's also directed the documentary Plain Spoken, a film inspired by the lives of Jimmy and Rosalind Carter and their neighbors in Plains, Georgia. He is a Texas native, which is weird because we've had nothing but Texans on this stage since this morning. I don't know what's going on with that. But now he also lives in Plains, Georgia. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Andrew and Kim.
Thank you so much. Well, good afternoon, everyone. We're so delighted to be here. Kim and I can't think of a better event than a festival that is built on books. I grew up as a reader, and I still am a voracious reader. Kim is a lifelong reader. She's always got a book in her hands or in her brain. And of course, we're here to talk today about Kim's uncle. It's good to have other family in here too. Chip, I'm glad you're here. And to talk about his Sunday school lessons, this unique part of his life. He, of course, was an incredibly well-read man and a prolific author himself. But before we get into having a conversation about these lessons, how I first got my hands into all of this and how I got involved with Plains, and just am incredibly honored to have been accepted into the fold, was through the documentary Plain Spoken. And I was able to conduct what became President Carter's last solo interview for that documentary. And we want to show you an edited version of that because it gives you a little glimpse into who President Carter was as a common, ordinary citizen, if you will, as a Plains person. It also gives you a snippet into his character as President of the United States and as a humanitarian. And it also gives us a portrait, a snapshot of his life as a person of faith. And so how this interview went down, this was later in his life. And so to respect the age that he was, we did an audio interview. But then we have edited it with B-roll that was from that same season. So this is some of the last footage of President and Mrs. Carter's life. What you will see in this, Plain Spoken was a documentary about race relationships in everyday community set in Plains, Georgia, which of course is the lifelong hometown of President and Mrs. Carter, lifelong hometown of Kim, and lucky me, the past couple years, my hometown, and maybe the rest of my life hometown. We'll see if Kim doesn't kick me out.
I hope you're lucky.
Yeah, exactly. So TBD. But anyway, so you will also hear content about his first experience with racism in this snippet. So if you'll just direct your attention to the screens, we'll watch that, and then Kim and I will begin our conversation together. Oh, we'll need audio.
It has a really nice sound to it.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Isn't that neat? An audio interview with no audio. Yeah, it's one of my magic tricks. Bob, y'all, do you want us to start the conversation and come back? Okay. All right, I'll be patient. One thing while they're getting that ready that I think is fascinating and that plays into these lessons that were included in the book more. I'll stop. Hey guys, we'll go on with our conversation and you give me a thumbs up and we'll play it a little later, okay? Does that sound good? Does that sound good with everybody here? Okay. We'll get to that. I was going to say one thing when we come back to that interview, one thing that I always found interesting and really intriguing about President and Mrs. Carter was their willingness to continue to be involved and engaged until the last days of their life. It's not, I don't think, representative of our current culture that we would allow ourselves to be in public, to be seen, and to be engaged even in the years where we're limited by our mobility or more frail in our health. And I think it's an incredible example that we have a purpose until the day that we continue our journey in the next life. So anyway, Kim, do you want to start us with this?
All right, I'll start. And when you get an opportunity to see the little snippet, it leads into my first question. And when Andrew came to Plains, he came because of Uncle Jimmy and Aunt Rosalind,
Yep,
right?
that's right.
Okay.
Heroes.
Right,
of
those
mine,
were
yes.
his heroes. And so he came to Plains. He came to Maranatha. He met them. He got his picture made with them. He did, and I learned last night that he actually came with a group and told the other people in his group that they could not be in the picture when he got his picture made with them and made them stand to the side while he got his picture made with Uncle Jimmy and Aunt Rosalind, which is
did not
fine.
make your uncle happy, though.
No, Uncle Jimmy, because if you ever went to church and had your picture made with Uncle Jimmy and Aunt Rosalind, he wanted everybody to get there in the group together. Some people are nodding, so they know what I'm talking about. So Andrew came to Plains to meet them to begin with, but he fell in love with Plains, right? And now he's bought a house. He lives 2 houses down from me, actually. Yeah, I know. So, but he lives 2 houses down from me, which is really good. I'm very proud. So that leads into the first question that I have today. And I think some of us were an unexpected surprise for Andrew, because I don't think Andrew felt that, I think he felt more embraced maybe than he thought he might be to begin with. But when Andrew came, it was just like he'd always been there. And we love him sometimes, but most of the time, But we love him. He does a wonderful job, and he has just immersed himself in our community. But one of the first questions I wanted to ask him, because of the topic of the book, was this. And one thing that I wondered was the relationship that you had with the community, with meeting Uncle Jim and Aunt Rosalind, with the people in Plains. Did that actually shape the perspective of what lessons you chose?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I poured through hundreds of lessons between Maranatha Baptist Church, where, of course, President Carter taught for so many years after he came back to Plains, after his presidency, where Kim teaches our adult Sunday school class now. They did a really wonderful job of partnering with the Carter Presidential Library here in Atlanta to make sure those were archived. But there are hundreds of lessons. And they began recording those lessons in the 1970s when he was President of the United States, teaching Sunday school, when I believe, and Chip, you might correct this if this is wrong, but they... President Carter and Mrs. Carter were attending just their couples class, the class that they would be assigned to attend based on their age and their marriage. And the teacher of that class asked if he would like to start substituting occasionally to teach. They had the wherewithal to record it. I just want to start with the President of the United States teaching a Sunday school class. It's the commitment to that personal aspect of his life in public, I just think is phenomenal. So then when I went through the lessons, though, so I poured through hundreds of them, and I would look through and go, they were categorized by books of the Bible, what the scripture reference was that he might have taught from, or what the title of the lesson might be, and I started to think, okay, I don't want to go all books from John, and I don't want to go all books from James, or I need to include the Old Testament, which is not my natural go-to when just wanting to read insights from scripture. I wanted to kind of get a wide breadth of his take on different portions of the Bible. But I do think being in Plains, one thing we wanted to capture that was very difficult for me as an editor of his words, one, he's a hero of mine. So I felt really, ginger kind of with the words. I didn't want to get anything wrong, or I didn't want to misrepresent in any way. But then two, I didn't want to over edit. There's the license for editors to be able, with people's words, including public figures, to really kind of just make it readable, especially when these lessons were delivered in an environment like this, in an oral way, right? So how did they fit on the page? So we worked really hard to bring you into the room. And how this comes back to answer your question is we left his language, which is his vernacular, that very Southwest Georgian thing. One of my friends says it sounds like they all have marbles in their mouth. Obviously, you're Georgians, and so I've just offended the whole audience, and no one will be buying the book now. But it's just that beautiful lilt of his natural conversational speech. We wanted to maintain that. So I really struggled, in a perfectionist standpoint, like if he said, I got to, I wanted to make sure it said, I have to. But no, we kept it like it was. I will say there were no y'alls and there were no ain'ts. None whatsoever. But that's something we did, is to keep you in the room. And also, this, your uncle always asked for audience feedback. If he was asking a question in Sunday school, it was not rhetorical. He wanted you to shout out what you thought, what your ideas were, so that the class may learn from that he might learn from that. And we included that in here as well as in italics, so that as you're answering the question he's asking on the page, you're also essentially reading the people sitting next to you, their answers. But yeah, I wanted to keep the folksiness, the plain spokenness of your uncle in these lessons in here.
Now, one question I asked Andrew this morning, and he answered it, so I want him to answer it for you. Were there any lessons that you included in the book that you actually heard him give?
I didn't totally want to give this away because I felt like it was kind of a bias or something, but yes. The first time I visited Plains was in 2007. Like many people, it was because the Carters were two significant heroes in my life. Now, I was born in the Reagan era, so I didn't know the Carters when they were in the White House as far as public figures. And really, I would say in the 90s when I was growing up, their humanitarian efforts, their work in the world had not really taken hold as far as it kind of being sexy yet or being maybe well celebrated. But by the time I got into college, I read An Hour Before Daylight, one of his incredible works. You should read it if you haven't. It's just a wonderful picture of his growing up experience in the community just outside of Plains, Georgia. And maybe he's talking to us through the screens. Okay. I'm not sure what's going on up there. We'll stay right here. But I was drawn into the area through their influence directly. I started looking online and realized that you could go to a Sunday school class and you could meet them and you can do all these things that many of us have done. So December 9th, 2007, I gathered a couple of my friends who had no idea what we were doing or where we were going to a town of 500 people in the middle of the pecan orchards in southwest Georgia. And I experienced not only your uncle's Sunday school class, Maranatha Baptist Church, but Plains for the first time. So I included that in here. As I was listening back to the tapes, he would, in the beginning, if you've been to his class, you know that he would ask where you were from. He would start in this section over here, and people would just yell out. And it could be China, it could be Ghana, or it could be Tennessee, or it could be Alabama, or whatever, wherever people were from. And I was listening, and I heard, Tennessee! That's where I lived at the time. It was me. And it felt just like a full circle. I just feel so honored to be a part of this work, and that added to it, so I had to include it in here.
Yeah. And if you did, how many of you actually listened to him give a Sunday school lesson? Oh, wow. Oh, wow, that's neat. Good. Chip, I know you raised your hand, so I know you did. And if you said that you were from Washington, D.C., he would always say, oh, I lived there at one time. That's what he would say, if you remember that. Yeah, I moved, yeah. All right, next question. You talked a little bit about humanitarian, that people really, it was before the time that people really realized what they were doing. One question that brought to mind for me was, when you were researching and studying Sunday school lessons, and those of you who've heard his Sunday school lessons, answer this too in your head if you want to. Could you tell how Uncle Jimmy took being president, being a humanitarian, and being someone who was very deeply involved in his faith? Did all three of those intersect in his Sunday school lessons? Could you tell that?
That's a great question in that, yes.
Okay.
He did not separate his public. What I always said about your uncle and aunt, when people ask me why am I so influenced by him, I've never seen two people whose profession was solely in the public square. They were not employed by the church. They were not ministers professionally, but their work was in the public square throughout the world. So dedicated to attempting to follow in the way of Jesus in their work. It's just really phenomenal to me. I don't think your uncle ever separated any of his personhood, and his faith was such a foundation, his spirituality to his personhood. I remember him talking in one of these lessons, a couple things. One, he talked about when he and Rosalind went to North Korea. And this was in 1994. Some of you will remember this because it made the news because it made Bill Clinton very angry. Just because it was a bit of a renegade mission for a former president to go into North Korea. And what I understand is that President Carter and Mrs. Carter were two of the first people to cross that line, cross that border from South Korea into North Korea on a diplomatic mission. And so extremely risky, dangerous, and also did not make him popular in the public square at the time. But he talks about continuing his lessons, that us versus them mentality. And so his mission into North Korea was not, he was not willing to villainize one of our world's villains. He was willing to see them as not us and them, but us all together. And I think that distinctly came from his belief in that I don't set the table for us all to come and be in communion with God. God sets the table. Everyone is invited, including set a table before, in the presence of my who? Enemies. So that example, he couldn't extract from his understanding of the scripture. And I'll give you one more example. He talked about abortion, and this was in the 2000s. And he talked about how when he was president of the United States, that his role as president, that it was to uphold the law of the land with the Supreme Courts, how they interpreted the law. And at that point in time, that of course was with Roe versus Wade. And he said how he got a lot of criticism about that, especially as a Christian man. And he said, while he did not, in his own belief, he did not think that Jesus would condone abortion, but he also believed it was our job as humans to do everything to be neighbors to those finding themselves with an unwanted pregnancy. Where are we, basically, was the question. Instead of condemning, perhaps we have compassion and we begin to serve those who find themselves in challenging places in their lives, as well as when we're in challenging places. You know, I see your t-shirt over there. What would Jimmy Carter do? I think that's what we kind of got some of the answers to that in these lessons. And he was going, what would Jesus do? But sometimes it's easier to listen to someone who has skin on them and understand some of that. Does that answer that question?
That answered it. Yeah, that's good. And I have one of those T-shirts, by the way. I wear mine too. So you mentioned the abortion issue. So another question comes to mind. When you were choosing the different lessons that you were going to include in the book, have you found that in today's climate that some of the lessons that you've chosen could be controversial, maybe, in today's climate? Maybe, sort of, kind of, maybe. Sort of, kind of.
For sure.
Yeah.
It goes against our current culture to humble myself before my neighbor, no matter who they are. That real power comes from digging down deep to lift up high.
Yeah.
And what I read in these lessons through your uncle's words is that it is never a waste to take the time to hear someone's story, to allow our minds to be stretched and our hearts to be stretched and our biases and prejudices, which, guess what? We all have them. We can't get away from that. We will have a bias. We will have a prejudice against another person. And he was continually confronting that. But what's amazing is he confronted it for himself first in these lessons. He would say, I have to challenge myself in my biases and prejudices. Will you challenge yourself? So it is, from my perspective, especially in American culture right now, it is just so counter to how we're expected to live. Also, he didn't, and this is in some of these lessons, I don't think he felt entitled as an American that we must preserve the American way at all costs, meaning at the cost of another individual. And I don't know that that's popular right now, that we would look beyond our own borders to go, oh, it's all of us together. That's just me, and that's what I interpret from his lessons. But I don't know. I would throw that question back to you.
What?
Oh, go on.
No. Another thing.
So you're not going to answer it?
No, not at this moment. Not at this moment. I will in a few minutes. But another thing, as far as the topics of the lessons themselves, Uncle Jimmy was not afraid in his lessons to address the examples that he gave when he was teaching a Sunday school lesson. You know, let's just say the Middle East, for example. you found that in these lessons that he wasn't afraid to address topics that were occurring in the Middle East during the time period that he was actually teaching the lessons. Do you think that, today's climate also topics like that?
Well, he wrote a book called Palestine, Peace,
that.
Not Apartheid.
I know that. I know he did. But I'm talking about a Sunday. He is trying to confuse me. I know he did.
This is the nature of our relationship.
This is how we live. I understand that, but I'm talking about, for normal people and Sunday school lessons. I mean, he wasn't afraid to touch on those topics at all while he was teaching the scripture.
Well,
and you saw that.
Yes, and what do we learn also in Scripture? Love casts out fear. Maybe that even casts out the fear of telling the truth. And I don't remember in any of the times that I heard your uncle teach or even had the privilege of talking with him that he ever skirted the truth. Now, I don't know. I'm sure there were times that, I don't know. I don't know his whole life. But in his lessons, I think he was willing to tell the truth as he knew it at that moment in time, and that's the best any of us can do, is to be honest and truthful. If you were here in the last session with Barbara Brown Taylor and Jen Hatmaker, that's what Jen was saying about her own life and her own experience, was that the gift we have to give ourselves and others is honesty and truthfulness. And I think President Carter offered that as a gift over and over and over.
He did. He was very honest. He was very honest.
Well,
yeah.
Speaking of, so like I, she's the moderator, but one, I don't like someone else being in control. Number one, and then number two, I'm just like kind of still,
You do remember I have family in here, right?
I do, and Chip of all people,
and friends,
so
and Phil. I have all these people
Phil,
in here.
Yeah, Phil's about to hold up the sign. Get off the stage. I'm just so geeked out to have found honestly the people of Plains and yes, the members of the Carter family that have become friends. So I'm geeked out by you being up here asking me questions. I'm going to ask you a question. You talk about his truthfulness. Well, so Kim teaches our adult Sunday school class now, but she also taught with her uncle. So he would teach on what we call Jimmy Sundays, where hundreds of people would come in, just like you that have raised your hands and myself. And then the membership of Maranatha is only 30 to 50 people at any given time. And so that's Kim would teach the non-event Sundays, but he was often in your Sunday school class. So I would say, what was it like teaching the former leader of the free world?
It was very scary at times. No, but really and truly, several times he and Aunt Rosalind would be gone, and then they would come in late Saturday night or come in early Sunday morning, and of course they were coming to church. So they would show up, and every once in a while there would be visitors in the audience, and we were talking, and they would come in and sit down, and I'd hear people going, "Oh my God, he's going to teach, he's here. And then I'd get up there and they'd go, "Oh, here she is. Here she is.
Who are you?"
Yeah. Oh my God. But, and I'll give a good example in just a minute. Uncle Jimmy did not officially give me the Sunday school class until about a year and a half before he just was not able to teach the Sunday school class anymore. I was his substitute. Even though, for example, my nephew was graduating from law school, and when Uncle Jimmy fell and broke his hip, Secret Service called me and said, "You need to get home because," and Chip knows how his daddy was, "he's coming to teach Sunday school." This was on Saturday. And they said, "As soon as you get here, will you please come to the house and let's talk to him?" And I said, okay. So we go in, and he's in there, and I said, "Uncle Jimmy, now I can teach Sunday school." And he said, "Okay." And I said, "Okay." And one of the Secret Service standing there going, he said, "I was just waiting for you to get home to make sure you would do it." And I said, okay. But one Sunday in particular, well, there were several Sundays, but this one in particular, the lesson was on Moses and the burning bush. And he and Aunt Rosalind were there. And right towards the end of the lesson, he raised his hand. And he said, "Can I speak?" And I did. I went, "Duh, yeah." And he got up there and he said, "I've been there." He said, "I've stood where the burning bush was." And he started talking about, I get chill bumps still. He started talking about it and explaining it. And he had done that hundreds and hundreds of times during his Sunday school lessons. But this time, there were just a handful of people there, you know. And it was like they just got a front row seat to watching him give an example. And then he sat down. And I finished up, you know. So, it was always very daunting to teach Sunday school because there were many times afterwards, I still have voicemails on my phone, which I will never get rid of, where he called and said, "You know you pronounce such and such incorrectly." And I'd go, and those of you who've been in my Sunday school class know that now I take that pronunciation thing on my phone and I learn how to pronounce those words because I know he's up there going, "This is not how you say it. This is how you say it."
Spit out the marbles.
Spit out, yeah. Make sure you say it. And then I have one in particular where Aunt Rosalind's in back. "Leave her alone." I have one. She can pronounce words the way she wants to. I would get emails. That's not. But now I treasure all of that. And it never made me mad at all. I appreciated it. But it was very daunting, but it's also been a very great honor that he trusted me to do that. You know, he trusted me, and I appreciate it.
And it was a trustworthy handing of the baton. Kim is an incredible educator and teacher, and I think you are your own teacher, but you do have traces of your uncle as well, and that you invite us in to the Sunday school class.
And I do say "ain't" when I'm up there, but it's just to make a point.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't use it all the time.
Yeah. Is that what it's about?
Yeah,
we're both big fans, Kim and I, of Barbara Brown Taylor, who moderated the last conversation, but she also wrote the foreword to the book, More Than a President. And one thing that she gleaned, she's an incredible individual, she's an incredible writer. One thing that's incredible about her is I've never had a foreword writer actually read through the entire book to decide if they wanted to write the foreword or not. I think she has a lot of integrity in the work that she does, but she thankfully did decide to write the foreword. And one thing that she gleaned from all the lessons in this book was that your uncle was always talking about stretching his mind, stretching his heart, challenging even his own beliefs or perceptions and perspectives. Did you see that in your relationship with your uncle? Did you see or ever experience or witness that kind of challenging his own thoughts or expanding on something that he once knew that now he either knows something different or knows more?
All the time. In fact, all of them, the four of them did that. Wouldn't you agree, Chip? They were always reading. They were always making sure that they knew about the topics that they spoke on. They always made sure of that. Uncle Jimmy in particular, one perfect example is the fact that he and Aunt Rosalind were teaching each other Spanish. You know, they wanted to learn how to speak. They had someone who came in to teach them, but they would speak in Spanish to each other at times to hone that craft. You know, at night they'd read the Bible to each other. You know, for one thing, they loved to read the scripture, but another way was to hone the craft of knowing more and more and more about the scripture. I don't know how many. My dad read 4 or 5 newspapers every day. One of our punishments growing up was to copy. Some of you young people don't know what an encyclopedia is, I know, but some of our punishments were to copy down encyclopedia entries. Some of you are nodding. Yeah, your mom and daddy did that too, I guess. But, and back then I resented it very much. But today I'm going, wow, I learned about such and such because I had to write it down from the encyclopedia, you know. So yes, he did. He was incredible. I mean, he knew more in his little tiny finger than I'll ever know, you know, and I think that's, yes. Yeah, it was part of his legacy.
One of the most tender scenes that came up during Sunday school while he was teaching and when you were a substitute teaching revolved around the time that his grandson, Jeremy, passed away unexpectedly. And in this book, so again, these are President Carter's words, his lessons. What I did is divided them up into decades, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s, and then the last year, which was 2019, as far as teaching. And I wrote introductions to each of the decades just to give some Carter context. What's something they were up to in their lives, in their work in the world, or in Plains that expressed elements of what he was hitting on in the Sunday school lessons. So I just wanted to read a brief portion. This is a scene from 2015 in December. It says, the only time Jimmy Carter was late to teach Sunday school was on the morning his grandson died. President and Mrs. Carter had been awakened the night before by a phone call communicating the distressing news that Jeremy, their 28-year-old grandson, had been rushed to the hospital after his heart had stopped beating while at home that evening. Inside the cover of midnight, Secret Service detail hurried the Carters 100 miles north from Plains to Peachtree City to tend to their family in what would be Jeremy's final hours of life. The dedicated security and authorized vehicles reflected the status of a former president and first lady, but at this dark hour and under these tragic circumstances, Jimmy and Rosalind were not world leaders. They were simply worried, sick grandparents. In Plains, it was a typical Sunday morning in December. The quiet air was perforated by foggy plumes distinctive of the brisk and damp mornings that preface winter solstice in the South. Just up the road at Maranatha Baptist Church, a few hundred out-of-towners emerged from their cars, bleary-eyed from napping overnight in the church's parking lot to make certain they would obtain a coveted spot inside the bucolic A-frame that famously hosted Sunday school with Jimmy Carter. Even amid the intensely personal and tragic events that had taken place within the last several hours of Carter's life, he was still mindful of his commitment to teach Sunday school and the pews of people that would be eagerly awaiting him for this occasion. So, Carter phoned his niece, Kim, a fellow Plains for lifer, to share the unsettling news about Jeremy and to request that she begin teaching the morning lesson until he arrived. You see, on non-Jimmy Sundays, when Carter was not scheduled to teach, Kim led the lesson for the few dozen folks who comprised the church's local membership, including her Uncle Jimmy and Aunt Rosalind. Earlier that year, Carter, at the age of 90, had been diagnosed with cancer. During a news conference held at his beloved Carter Center in Atlanta, the elderly statesman shared with the public the details of his diagnosis, fielded questions from the press, and recounted his initial response when they confirmed he did indeed have cancer. He said, "I've had a wonderful life. I've had thousands of friends, and I've had an exciting and adventurous and gratifying existence, so I was surprisingly at ease, much more so than my wife was." He grinned, a perpetual hope emanating from the twinkle in those crystal clear blue eyes. "But now, I feel it's in the hands of God, whom I worship, and I'll be prepared for anything that comes." Just a few months later, on December 6th, Carter prepared a lesson from Luke 1 featuring the Magnificat, which is Mary's hymn of praise to God for extending his favor to her and choosing her to deliver the Messiah. In that passage, she expresses, "My soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God, my Savior. The Mighty One has done great things for me." Just before teaching the lesson, Carter gave his own praise account to the packed class. His cancer was gone. His life had been spared. 2 weeks later, his grandson Jeremy would draw his last breath of life. The order of life seemed all wrong. Jeremy, not yet 30, was unexpectedly dead, and his grandfather Jimmy, a nonagenarian with brain cancer, was unexpectedly alive. About a half hour into the lesson, Kim caught sight of her uncle out of the corner of her eye. In his usual Sunday school fashion, Carter strode into the sanctuary from the side door entrance nearest the organ and smiled at the crowd gathered. He kissed Kim on the cheek and they embraced. That knowingness that connects family members after something unexplainable has occurred. You could see it in his face, sadness. "I'm sorry I'm late," he began. "It's the first time I've ever been late getting to Sunday school." But the crowd did not demand an apology of Carter that morning. Rather, they carefully welcomed him in as if to offer a sacred space for a grieving grandfather and his pain. And if even for just a few moments, shoulder some of the weight of the hurt with him. You see, for this hour in time, Carter was not a commander-in-chief, nor an international peacemaker. He was not a handy home builder. He wasn't a warrior against disease. He could not problem solve the illness that afflicted his grandson, nor the ache that now afflicted he and Rosalind and his family. He was simply a human being in the midst of a hard ache of the heart. He said Jeremy was a special person, a wonderful young man who he loved very much. Then he proceeded to summarize the morning lesson from his perspective, shaped by the tragedy from the night before, saying we should be filled with a sense of joy and thanksgiving. What is there in my life that I have received from God for which I am thankful and which should bring me joy even in the face of the sorrow like I have today? Do you remember that Sunday?
I do remember that Sunday. Uncle Jimmy called me right before they left, and he said, "Jeremy's in the hospital. Can you prepare the lesson?" And of course I said yes. And then the next morning, early in the morning, he called back and he said, "Jeremy has passed away. I'm on my way home." And I said, "Well, I'll be, Uncle Jimmy, just rest. Just stay home. You don't need to come." He said, "No." He said, "Those people are there." And if you ever went to, some people camped out in the yard at church to see him. And he said, "No, they're expecting me. I'm coming." So that was my very first time giving a Sunday school lesson in front of a group of people who were there to see him. And I'm not making light of the situation at all. But when I walked up there, you saw the visible disappointment on 200 faces in the audience. They looked at me and I said, like an idiot, I said, "I know I'm not who you want to see." I said, "But he'll be here." I said, "He's not going to not be here." I said, "And when he comes, he'll talk to you about why he's late." And I'm going to be honest, I kept thinking, "Uncle Jimmy, come on, come on. Uncle Jimmy, come on, come on." And about 15 minutes, closer to 20 really, out of the corner of my eye, just like Andrew read, I saw him come in the side door and stand there. And I didn't have to see him because the crowd went, it was just like, and he walked up and he kissed me on the cheek and I said, "Where have you been?" And he said, "I've been back there watching you on the monitors to see how you're doing." And I went, "Why did you do that?" But anyway, and then he grinned, and then, of course, he started. So it was wonderful. But I think, Andrew, that shows you and all of you who knew him and loved him too, that's who he was. That's who he was. That's who he was.
Yeah. Do you think, even though he obviously hadn't felt an accountability to want to be there as he promised for the people, do you think coming to church or even teaching from the scriptures, which he did throughout his whole life, was an anchor for him to begin to process that grief?
Yeah, I do. I think that he needed that. That was a comfort for him. You know, and you know, so many times we look at Uncle Jimmy, people like him, and we think that's his. Oh, they don't need comforting. He was Jimmy Carter. I mean, you know, but like you just said so well, he was a granddaddy at that point. You know, and he needed that. He needed to be with his people. He needed the comfort. And it's 15 minutes. You just held up the thing.
We're getting there. All right. She's much gentler. Last session, this fine man was dancing across the front.
He was.
With wrap it up.
I know.
Well, do you want me to sing this?
Yes, I do. All right, I'm going to say this. Andrew's got a brand new song that he wants to sing, but well, never mind. He got asked to sing it. And do we want him to sing his song? Thank you. Yes.
Well, you may regret it. I have never sung this one in public, which is always comforting for the audience, isn't it? But let's see here. Let me just get a... Okay. I have the words down here, so just bear with me. But I wrote this on my front porch in Plains. And right after this, we would like to take a couple questions. So be thinking. And remember, your statement must end with a question mark. Can you hear that well enough? Okay. I was just thinking, I grew up in Texas, but my parents didn't. My family's very nomadic in a sense. And I was just thinking of the lives of Jimmy and Rosalind and folks like Kim who were born and bred in a spot and have stayed there or have invested back into the soil of where they grew up their whole life. And so I wrote this on the porch in Plains just a couple months before Mrs. Carter passed away. Lay me down in the red dirt clay, 'neath the hum of Mary's song. Hear that train car roll and moan along the lines in the fields of home. The ease and bend of a stitch and hem, hands along the wither of my old friend. Every trot and lope, every step he knows, young and free in the fields of home. Let the day go out on me, to the night spill all my dreams. In this earth rest these bones, lay me down in the fields of home. Well, his old hands have known this land, and I have known him strong and kind. From these thorns we have bloomed and grown, in the love, in the fields of home. Let the day fade out on me, to the night spill all my dreams. In this earth rest these bones, lay me down in the fields of home. Oh, the ground here sing my memory. In the distant sky, hear love's longing cry. Call me on to the fields of home. Call me on to the fields of home. All right, any questions? There's a microphone right here. And yes, ma'am, I think are they supposed to go to that microphone, or I'll come give it to you? I don't care. Here, right here. Tell us your name, too.
Lane. Yes. And I voted for Jimmy Carter.
Yes, good.
Yes, of course I did. A silly question. This is just a simple mechanical question. I know that in many churches, the ministers are guided by what is known as a lectionary in choosing the text on which they will preach for any given Sunday. And my question is, the lectionary does not necessarily guide a Sunday school teacher, but how was it a theme chosen for the particular series of weeks, or was there a consensus decision on focus on a particular book, or a theme? I was just curious to know who chose the text, how far in advance to prepare the lesson, and was it guided by any sort of theme or season?
That's a great question.
Pretty much both Uncle Jimmy and myself follow a Sunday school lesson as far as books go. And you have your scripture. Most of those Sunday school lesson books that we have are divided into months. And the months either, same thing. But I will tell you this. One night I asked him, we were at something, and I asked him, I said, don't you like the commentary that's going on? He said, I don't use that commentary. He said, I don't have to use the commentary. I went, oh, excuse me. I am
the commentary.
Yeah, I am the commentary. I am the commentary. But that's what we do. He did it too. Yes. And then that way, if all of a sudden he couldn't come, he could call me and I'm looking at the same thing, so.
Kind of cool how practical it was, huh?
Thank you for that very thoughtful and loving conversation. I have a question for you in particular, Andrew. It seems like you were granted access to some incredibly intimate details of the Carter family's life. I mean, the tapes of the Sunday school lessons, but I mean, you're recalling the story of his grandson's death. Can you talk a little bit about how you were able to establish that kind of relationship with former President Carter and First Lady? I mean, I can only imagine they're probably approached by a lot of different people who may want to talk to them, but you seem to have established a really special relationship with them.
Well, I think relationships go two ways, and I think for Plains, like Kim and I were talking with our dinner guests last night about my connection with Plains and Plains' connection with me, it must have just already been there. And that includes everybody in that environment, not just the Carters. The Carters may have drawn me in. That was my gateway into a community, but it certainly was the entire community. So I don't know that I know the answer to that, except what's the answer to chemistry. I think sometimes my dad told me when I was considering moving from Nashville, where I've lived my whole adult life as a songwriter, to Plains, he said, sometimes we find within the people and the place that our soul is at rest. And when we find that, if we're lucky to, once or twice in our life, we must go. And so that doesn't directly answer your question, except to say, I don't know that I was provided any access. I think the Carter family has always been accessible to everyone. I understand what you're asking, but that's just a part of becoming a part of the community when you find people who are family. It may not be your family of origin, but these people have become some of my chosen family, and I think it's a two-way street if I'm not overspeaking. But Kim may, depending on the day, she'll vote. Any other questions? We're about out of time. There's probably time for one more if someone has one. Chip, did you have something you wanted to clarify? Anything you want to say? Here, let me run you the mic. It's wonderful to have President and Mrs. Carter, one of their sons, Chip, here.
Don't talk ugly,
You know,
Chip.
if you
Don't
show
talk
up
ugly.
in planes at everything. He showed up every time Dad did, you know, every single time. So if it was like 6 people out front, he was one of them. On and on and on. But he did become a friend of all of us. It was really nice for me. I walked here, you know, so I saw in the paper that they were going to be here. I just kind of, my feelings about being here with this was just really something. I mean, I didn't know what to expect, but they had me almost crying back there a few times. And my cousin Kim is a wonderful human being and has kind of held our whole family together back there. And I thought I was a great son too, but when he went into Dad's room and his telephone on his desk, the automatic call button number 1 was Kim. And I wanted, you know, I spent years, all my whole life with Dad, but I spent years when Dad would take for a whole year and he would study Islam, or he would study Buddhism, or he would study Hinduism. All the 7 major religions, I don't know what they all are. But when he was president, he was so much to keep the separation between church and state was just as much as him being a Christian. He was not going to force that. And the other thing he did in his Sunday school classes is he basically turned what he had done the week before, the 2 weeks before, into part of the lesson every time so that people were realizing the Bible in real time, like in today's world instead of 2,000 years ago. Anyway, I didn't expect to come down here, and they've got 2 minutes, so I better get out of here.
So let's say thank you to our guests here today, Kim Carter Fuller and Andrew Greer. It's been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much. Oh, and so they're going to be out here signing books.